All right, this is what we came for. It's time to make an offer. So we have gotten to the point where we want to actually make an offer on a property, which is awesome, right? And when that time comes, we want to take a little bit of a breath, sit back, go back to your wants and your needs, the things you need, the things you want, and your goals, and make sure that you haven't gotten like enamored with the fun things or the sexy things, right? Like make sure this is actually the property that meets your goals and meets your needs. So that's the first thing you want to do. Next thing you want to do is make sure your lender and your real estate agent are on the same page. Okay. You want to make sure that you understand that the amount you're putting down does not include your closing costs. And so you're going to need your down payment money, and then you're also going to need your closing cost money. And those are two separate things. And we get into more of that in the mortgage class. So again, if you haven't taken the mortgage class, absolutely take the mortgage class. But for the purpose of this, we're going to focus more on the real estate side of it, which is making that offer. So you've decided that this house meets your goals, meets your needs, and you're ready to make an offer. The next thing you want to try to understand is what leverage do you have? Okay, where are you at with leverage, or what leverage can you create? What are the seller's motivations? What is important to the sellers? So number one, it's usually about money, but sometimes the closing date's important to the sellers. Or maybe they want to close quick, or they want to close slow, or, this opens a whole new can of worms that we don't get into in this class, but it may be that the seller wants to occupy the house after closing, or maybe they want to collect some rent prior to closing, or maybe there's a tax issue, right? Like you want to understand what is motivating the seller to sell this property and what's important to them. People, it's amazing what bad real estate agents will give up in terms of motivation because they want to get the deal done. So ideally, you're going to have a real estate agent that can have a conversation with the other agent and learn about those motivations and understand what leverage you have. If there are 3 other offers on the property and 2 of them are cash, you may not have a bunch of leverage. And it's okay to admit that you don't have leverage. Like you need to understand whether you have it or you don't. If the house has been sitting obviously for a long time and they haven't gotten any offers, maybe you have some more leverage to come down in price. Maybe you have a seller who's just stuck in price and won't listen to their real estate agent. Like you don't know that. Sometimes you got to put an offer out there to figure it out, but it's all about creating leverage. Sometimes you can do things like offer to put a dumpster on the property and pay for somebody to help the seller throw away all their stuff. Or, agree that if they get all their stuff out, you'll pay for a cleaner to come in. What's causing them headache? Like what can you do that you're willing to do that can create the seller wanting to sell the property to you? So that's one of the things I want to look for and try to understand before I write my offer. Okay, let's dive into the buy sell. And this one's going to take a little bit of time to go over, but I want to make sure you guys understand a buy sell. And again, we're going to look at a Montana buy sell here. So all buy sells are different. They're constantly changing. The Montana forms get updated all the time. So your buy sell is going to look a little bit different than this. I can almost guarantee it, but it's going to give you the general idea of what you need to do. So number one, when you see a buy sell, just make sure it's all been updated. Like it's amazing how many times things don't get updated or you've made an offer before. So we're going to make sure that the date is correct. Then how are you going to take possession of the house? Are you going to own it with somebody else? So there's going to be more than one people. And if there's more than one people, is it joint tenants with right of survivorship? Again, I'm not an attorney, but basically that means that if Bill and Sally own the house and something happens to Bill, it's automatically going to go to Sally. Okay. Tenants in common are kind of like 2 separate entities. And my understanding of it is the tenants in common, it doesn't necessarily transfer to the other person. That person's estate still has ownership interest in the house, and it would be kind of defined by the estate. Other may be, like an LLC. Sometimes you'll see a name and or assigns, meaning that they want to be able to assign the contract. Later in this buy sell, it says that you can't do that. So we need to make sure it's clear that if you're going to assign it to somebody else, kind of an advanced level thing, not for today, but most people are either going to be buying it individually or joint tenants with right of survivorship. Those are kind of the 2 most common ones. Then we're going to put in the address. We want to make sure the address is right, the city, the county, and the legal description. We want to make sure the legal description is right, because that's really what matters most for title companies and for lenders, is making sure that the legal description is right, not the address. Okay. Then down through here, this is 12 through 20. This kind of talks about what is staying with the property. Again, if you were to take that property and you were to shake it and turn it upside down and shake it a little bit more, everything that stays put should be staying there. But make sure you understand what's staying, what appliances are staying, unless they're excluded below. So anything written in 21 or 22, if they're excluded, they're not going to be there. Sometimes you see this like with curtains versus blinds. Maybe it's a kid's room and the curtains are special or something like that, or the blinds are special. You just want to make sure you understand all of that. Okay. Purchase price. Here's where you want to put in the purchase price and the earnest money. Again, earnest money is usually due within a couple of business days, and it says this later on in there. Earnest money can't be cash, and it's got to come from an account that's traceable. So make sure it's coming usually from a checking account. Again, with wire fraud, I would prefer you wrote the check and took it into the title company yourself, then wired it in. Wire fraud is absolutely real. And then after you have the purchase price and your earnest money, that's going to be the remaining amount that you're going to owe at closing. And how are you going to finance this? All cash, no financing contingency. So it's all cash. By the way, cash must be actual cash, not in a 401k, not in an investment account in stocks. Like, it's got to be in cash that you could call up and get that day. There are tons of investment accounts where you can't get the money that day. It's got to settle. It's got to sit for a while. It's got to season. It's got to do all these things. Actual cash. And lots of agents get this wrong. Cash has to be accessible that day. What type of loan you're doing? Again, you want your real estate agent and your lender to be on the same page in terms of what type of a loan and how much you're putting down. Okay? And your pre-approval letter. Real quick note on pre-approval letters. Folks, if you're buying a house and you're at the absolute maximum amount you're pre-approved for, you probably shouldn't be buying that house. So pre-approval letters, I don't worry about the other side knowing you can pay more. The buyer should always be able to pay more. It's just what they're willing to pay. And if you stick to your guns, the fact that you may be able to afford more doesn't mean you're really willing to or can really afford more, in my opinion. So people always should be approved for more than they're buying, unless there are some situations where it's bonuses or something that the lender can't count for income. But you should not be maxing out your debt to income ratio to buy a house. So again, you want to have a pre-approval letter. I think you want to make it specific to that house, but don't get caught up in having like an approval amount in there. Okay, then we're going to get into closing date. Closing date is the date that you're going to obviously close on the house and hopefully gain possession. Okay. In closing date down here, there also sometimes will build in some more days for your lender if some paperwork goes wrong or something like that, to allow the contract to continue without an amendment to the contract due to lender issues. Okay, that gets us through there. Possession. This one throws some people off. Going back to closing date, I love to close on a Thursday. Thursdays are like my favorite days for closing. And then take off Friday. Don't take off Thursday. Take off Friday. Couple of things here. Number one, if something goes wrong, it gives them another day to kind of fix the problem. If you try to close on a Friday and something goes wrong, the title companies are closed all weekend, you're not going to get the house until Monday. So I like to have it be on a Thursday. Lots of times Thursday after work, you can go kind of make sure you, if you want to drop a mattress in there and sleep there or something like that, then do it. But make your closing date on a Thursday. The other thing you need to make sure you do is on the day of closing or the night before, but preferably the very, very first thing on the morning of closing, is go with your real estate agent and do a walk of the house. Make sure it was left how it was supposed to be left. Make sure a pipe didn't explode. Make sure the water didn't get left on. Make sure the window didn't get broken. Make sure the house is in the condition you expect it to be in before you go sign the documents, or at least before the title company has permission to record. So you want to go do that final house walk, and you want to plan your closing date out around a time that you can do that or somebody can do that. So ideally, Thursday morning, you would wake up, maybe take a couple hours off of work, you would meet at the house, you would walk through the house, and you would sign the documents. Thursday morning or Wednesday night. You can sign documents, maybe do your walk Thursday morning. Work with your real estate agent on that. And then go to work, relax, enjoy your day, because you're probably not going to get possession. Most people, at least in Montana, want it to be when the title company actually records. So when it records, there's a strong argument for really it should be 51 when the closing date is in receipt of all the required signed documents and funds, because in Montana that's legal ownership of the property. But that throws a lot of people off, and it's not always worth fighting. So you may not get the keys to your house until 4:30, 5 o'clock on your closing day, and now you've been sitting around twiddling your thumbs. Or you should be packing up all your stuff that day and getting it into your U-Haul so that you can then move in on Friday. So make sure you understand possession when you're actually going to get the keys to the house and be able to start moving in. But make sure you do your final walkthrough before closing. Earnest money, this is where you're just going to talk about when your earnest money is due. I always run earnest money through a title company, but that's between you and your agent. And so you need to make sure you get the earnest money to the title company by 5 o'clock on the date that you agree to do that. Okay? This is if the earnest money is going to be held by, well, you can just say that this is going to be held by the title company, or it can be held by your broker in theory. Okay, now, personal property. This one is also super important. Oop, let's get it down there. Okay, personal property. This is all the things that are going to transfer with the house that maybe weren't included. Maybe there's a loose shed out back, or a refrigerator. A lot of times refrigerators, they're not fastened down. Make sure the refrigerator's there. You're going to see a bunch of appliances and stuff down in here. Or, there may be some other things that, there's a basketball hoop that's out back, or there's, that's not fastened down. You want to make sure that we're very clear. I always make sure that I clarify hot tubs. Hot tubs are mentioned up here on line 19 right there, but I always make sure to put hot tubs down right here, because hot tubs aren't actually fastened down and they can become an issue, along with refrigerator. Those are the big things. Wow, I got lost here. That I see. So make sure you're putting anything that's not very, very clear. Then this is any leased or rented property. This is stuff that you may be responsible for, or need to get into your name. If there's a water conditioner, that's the big one we see. Propane tanks, alarm systems. Make sure you know what is leased and rented versus what is owned, because it may be that somebody shows up at your door to pick up a water softener that you thought was part of the house, or you need to know what that lease payment is. Okay? Loan application. This basically just says that you are going to apply for the loan. Folks, this should already be done. Like this should be done. This is why you have your pre-approval letter with, you should know your budget, you should know your goals, you should know your loan application. This should be done. Done. You should be fully applied for a loan, but it's there. Okay. There are some rules about if it's a VA buyer or an FHA buyer. We're not going to get into that. That's a little bit more. And then we're going to talk about, there's smoke detectors in there. Property inspections. Okay. Here again, you're acknowledging that your real estate agents are not builders. They're not plumbers. They're not any of those types of things. And then this is also going to talk about contingencies and when contingencies expire or become null. So it's usually at 5 o'clock on the day of, unless they're not released. You can lose your right to do things. So number one, inspection contingency. I claim you should always do an inspection. Unless you're buying the house from somebody you personally know, like your parents. But even then, do an inspection. It's not that the sellers are being dishonest. It's that there's a lot of things about a house that the sellers don't know. When's the last time the seller went down in the crawl space? When's the last time the seller went up into the attic? When's the last time the seller actually looked through their house like a home inspector does? They're trained. They're different. They're trained differently. It's so easy for sellers to honestly not know things that are wrong with their house. You need to do a home inspection. Okay. With the home inspection, you need to talk with your agent about any other things that you're going to need on top of the home inspection. So what is included in the home inspection, and then what else needs to be tested? So do you want to test for radon, for example? Outside of Montana, there's a lot of tests for insects and things like that. In Montana, if it's on a well, you may want to test the well water or the pump. The septic, you may need the septic pumped and or inspected. You may need to have somebody flag the corner pins. You want to know exactly where the corner pins are, or you may want a full flagging done of all the utilities. So there are a lot of things outside the home inspection that you need to go over and make sure you know what needs to be done. You can do meth testing. You can do air samples for mold, or maybe the home inspector sees something that triggers the need to do some more testing. So there is so much that can be done, and every situation is different. Just make sure that you know what is important to you and what some of the issues in the area are. So you're then going to have an amount of time that you can do that, okay? And so you have to give notice right here on 177. You have to give a notice of anything that you don't approve of. And when you do that, you can terminate the deal. At least in Montana, you can terminate the deal. You can be like, hey, because of this, we are terminating, and you get your earnest money back, okay? Or you can say, hey, we don't approve of this, and propose a solution to them. We want the sellers to fix this, or we want them to pay us this amount, or we want a price reduction of this amount. So there's a lot of things you can do, but you propose or negotiate a solution, a resolution to the conditions, okay? And so you list out your objections, and then you put down your proposal for what you want to see happen. Okay, assuming you do that by this date at 5 o'clock, in Montana at least, then you have a certain amount of time to negotiate that out. Or maybe you frankly just need some more time, or the seller wants to have a different roofing company come out, or they want to have a different plumber come out. They want to do their own investigation. So you have until line 188 to come to a resolution. Okay, so this is key. This is absolutely key. When you go under contract to buy a house, it is your house to buy. It is a legal document that the sellers are going to sell the house to the buyers. And the buyers normally have a handful of ways to get out. Number one is the financing contingency. Number two is the inspection. Number three is usually the appraisal. Number four is the title. And we're going to talk about all those things. Those are some ways that the buyer can walk away. Sellers have a hard time walking away. So if you're under contract, let's say at $500,000, and somebody comes in and says, no, well, we'll pay you $550,000, the sellers don't really have a way to get out of the contract. Okay? Now here's a key point. In 188, it says if you don't come to a resolution, right, or withdraw. So let's go to 187. If the buyer does not withdraw in writing his or her disapproval of the conditions noted on or before the resolution date at 5 p.m., the earnest money shall be returned to the buyer. Sounds good, right? Until you read the next line. And the agreement then terminated. So if you give a notice of something that's wrong, and you guys do not come to an agreement by 5 o'clock on that date, the deal is terminated. Be careful here. This is the one spot where a seller could play games. I think it's unethical, and I don't think it's right, but you just need to get a heads up that you need to stay on top of these dates. You need to make sure you're giving notice by this date, and you need to make sure you either have a resolution, you have an amendment that gives you more time to that resolution date, or you got to accept the house as it is. Or you got to terminate. So make sure you're working with your agent on dates. Knowing these dates is so incredibly important to the transaction. Okay. Another contingency is the financing contingency. You have to be able to get financing. Okay. And financing, well, you know, you've got to be able to get the financing in the if you check the box. You know, if you don't check any of these boxes, they're not guaranteed without checking the boxes. Appraisal. It can also be an appraisal contingency, 197, that it either appraises for the purchase price or it appraises for at least this amount. There are certainly times where you're putting a big amount down or something and it doesn't need to appraise for the full price. And so you can create some leverage by saying, hey, yeah, we have to have an appraisal. The house, we're making an offer at $500,000, or we're making an offer at $1 million, but the house only has to appraise for $300,000, or let's appraise for $700,000 because of the amount of money you're putting down. So it's another way for you to create leverage and make your offer look better. Okay. And then there's usually some days in there that allow you guys to negotiate if it doesn't appraise. Okay. And you can contest appraisals, talk to your agent and your lender about it. Not always successful, but you can do that. We've talked about title before and how important title is. This is days. So from the time you guys get the title report, you have a certain amount of days to review it. I would put at least 7, preferably 10 days in here. Sometimes sellers get finicky about this, but you want time to go over the title. You want time to go over any covenants. You want time to actually review this and get any easements, get any more documents you need, because the first title report probably won't have all the easements in it. So make sure you have time in there. Okay. If you don't object within those number of days, then that contingency is now gone and you don't have it anymore, and you're stuck with that. Okay. Insurance contingency. One of the best things you can do is as soon as you go under contract, call your insurance agent and get a quote. Okay. Get a quote so that you know what your insurance is going to be, and your lender's probably going to need that. So if you have financing, get it to your lender. Okay. There's a release date in here. Lots of times this release date is the same as the inspection release date, but it doesn't have to be. There's a lead-based paint disclosure. We're going to go over disclosures on another lesson. Just talks about lead-based paint, and an owner's property disclosure. This recently changed, but making sure that you get that owner's property disclosure. Okay. Then you can also put in the agreement is contingent upon, and these are other things that make this agreement contingent. Let's say you have to sell a house. That's one of the most common ones. Hey, this agreement is contingent upon us selling our house at 123 Main Street in whatever city. And then maybe you'll put in there, it's currently under contract with a closing date. This is the release date. This is the release date that the contingency is released upon. So if you don't give notice of a non-release, then it also goes away on this date. So one of the things I like to do, especially if it's a contingent upon the sale of a house, put the release date that it's released on the successful closing on the sale of the house, so that if something happens, you don't have to go back in and do an amendment or a non-release. So this is where you can put in, other things that it's contingent upon. It's contingent upon the seller getting the yard mowed, or the seller providing you with a pumper's report, or there's certainly things that it can be contingent upon. We've got to be really careful here as real estate agents that we don't become lawyers. Additional provisions, this is kind of a spot that can, less is more in here, right? If you don't have to put anything in here, I always think it's a good idea. I like staying within the forms, but this is, sometimes I've seen things like, hey, buyers are willing to provide a dumpster on site, or allow maybe the seller to occupy the garage for 3 days post-closing. Again, we don't want to establish landlord-tenant relationships here, but this is where you can add in some stuff as needed. Okay. This is where you're going to disclose whether you have or have not received the owner's property disclosure statement. Conveyance, this will probably be by a warranty deed per your lender, but it's telling title how the property shall be conveyed. Manufactured homes, if it's a manufactured home, they need a little bit of information about it. Water, this is where we're talking about who's going to pay water fees. So if it's a well, you want to transfer those water rights, make sure you get your water rights. If there's water rights, you want to make sure you get them. Who's going to prepare the documents and who's going to pay for the documents. Okay. Floodplain, you need to know if the house is in a floodplain. Mineral rights, usually there are not mineral rights with the property, at least in the state of Montana. So that kind of goes over there. Closing fee. Closing fees can be very complicated because buyers and sellers all have different closing fees. This is a fee charged by the title company to process all the documents. It's not your title policy that the title company also charges. It's not maybe a recording fee. It's maybe not a document prep fee, but it's a fee they charge just kind of to do it. Right now it's about $1,000. So it's usually $500 to the seller and $500 to the buyer if it's shared equally. So if you share it equally, that's usually $500. As the buyer, talk with your lender, because you're going to have a bunch of fees with your lender for paying off old mortgages or recording at the county. Like there's going to be other fees. Sellers are going to have real estate agent fees potentially if they're negotiated in. Bringing taxes current. Like there's all sorts of things. But this right here is just that title company fee. Right now in Montana, it's about $1,000. Okay. This is saying that the seller is going to provide a form of title insurance, an alt standard coverage. Okay. This is fairly, it's a big fee to the seller, and it's part of the seller fees. Lots of times you're going to need an extended coverage, and the buyer's going to have to pay for that. It's going to be dependent on your lender, or if you want some extended coverage. Extended coverage is a great thing, especially when it comes to like property lines and access and stuff like that. I would definitely talk to the title company about what that costs and what it provides. The condition of title needs to be clean and clear. This talks about a 1031 exchange. This is where somebody may be completing a 1031 exchange. Either you are coming in as the buyer from another property, or the seller is going to use the sale proceeds into a 1031 exchange. Really what they want to make sure is that both sides will help that happen. It doesn't cost the other side anything. It just, if somebody's trying to do it, they need to be allowed to do it, and that just puts it in there. Special improvement districts and special assessments. It goes over that. You want to make sure you know any SIDs, or, they're probably going to get transferred over to you. They can get paid off. So basically, if there's a special improvement, hey, the city has added X amount to your tax bill to pay for the sidewalks. It is prorated over let's say it's prorated over 10 years. That proration is going to go to you wherever they're at. If they're 7 years into it, you're going to have 3 years left of paying that special assessment. It's all negotiable, but it's very common for that just to get transferred over. Proration of taxes and assessments. So here it is in Montana, taxes are paid in the rear. So you may be selling the property on a date and they actually owe 3, 6, 7, maybe even 8 months of taxes. So the seller is going to bring the taxes current or give you a credit. And then when that bill is due, you're going to pay it. So you're going to have a credit in your escrow account probably that pays for the taxes when the seller was there. This can get super complicated. Like I could do a full class on just proration of taxes. Just know the title companies know what they're doing, and the seller is going to pay the property taxes unless otherwise negotiated up into the day of closing or credit you for it. And then when that bill comes due, you're going to have that credit to pay it. So you may have a huge tax bill you pay, but you're going to have had a credit at closing for that amount. I'm going to leave it at that. Propane tanks. If there's a propane tank on it, let's say it's 50% full of a 100-gallon tank, you're going to credit the seller for the propane that's in that tank. And you're either going to pay the amount, usually is that the seller paid for it, or current market value, whichever is less. So it's a pretty good deal for you. But it's an asset that you're going to reimburse them for. Property condition, it needs to stay in the same condition as when you viewed it, minus normal wear and tear. They are responsible for letting you know if anything does break between now and closing. So it's just making it clear that the sellers have to continue to maintain the property. Okay. There's noxious weeds in the state of Montana. There's bad people in the state of Montana. You can look up bad people. Not giving you cop advice as a former cop, but I'm telling you, there are bad people everywhere. And I worry more about the people who are unregistered than the people that are registered. Radon gas. Do some research on radon gas. Here's what I can tell you about radon gas. If you don't think radon gas is a big deal to you, it may be a big deal when you go to sell your property. So it's, if you can take care of radon gas when you're buying it and get a mitigation system in, it should save you when you're selling it, even if radon gas isn't a big deal to you. Okay. If you're doing a new construction, there is an addendum that should be included. This talks about what the buyers and the sellers can do if the buyer or seller doesn't perform. I always tell people this is a legal contract and you need to follow it because none of us want to end up in court. Okay. We're not a foreign entity, and this is a consent to disclose some information. And basically what it means is the title company may need to get information out, and it allows them to do that. Okay. Another wire fraud. Like this is the third time I think you've seen wire fraud. Wire fraud is real. Again, you make sure you Google the phone number to the title company, you call the title company, and you talk to them to get wire instructions. Do not accept wire instructions via email. Don't do it. Okay? And it doesn't change. Wire instructions don't change. This talks about third-party information and that lots of times we pull stuff off of cadastral. I've had situations where we've emailed a city and asked if septic and water were run to a property, and they told us they were. And when the clients went to build, there wasn't septic or water run to the property. And so it basically is saying is that at some point, I, as a real estate agent and the seller, the developer paid for it to be done. The guy who was supposed to install it just missed the valves for that lot. So it talks about the fact that we at some point have to rely on other people. There is a risk of loss or damage to the above property. And it is assumed through the seller through the time of closing unless otherwise specified. So seller is responsible for it. Time is of the essence. We got to move this thing forward. This is a binding contract, and it is non-assignable unless you negotiate otherwise. This talks about attorney fees and who has to pay them. Let's make sure that we don't do that. This is the commission. talking about being able to pay commissions. Faxes, counter signatures, and electric signatures are the same as real. You have to include all the pages in the agreement. Earnest money disputes. This is why I like running it through title. Title company will probably hold the money until everybody agrees or there's a judge's order. This is any additional addendums or disclosures that are attached. I prefer not to attach anything on the buy-sell. I prefer to keep all of those separate from the buy-sell. I shouldn't maybe say that totally. There are some things where you would have maybe, hey, our offer is contingent upon the sale of the buyer's property. Like that would make sense to include in here. Or, if you know you're in a backup position, it can be a backup offer. That's fine. But what I don't like to include is any owner's property disclosure statements or things like that. And then this talks about who represents who. So who's representing the buyer and who's representing the seller. This is the buyer's acknowledgement. And then here is, this is the buyer's acknowledgement of whether they viewed the property in person or not. So if you physically viewed the property or not. This always gets a little bit sticky when one person's viewed it and one person hasn't. So that's a situation where under special provisions, I like to write, Bob has viewed the property, Sally has not. Therefore, we are checking that the buyer has viewed the property, but disclosing that not all buyers have seen the property. Okay, this is the buyer's commitment. So this is how long you are allowing your offer to be valid for. So basically, if you put out an offer and the seller signs it before this time, then you move forward. At that point in time, so if you say it's tomorrow at 5 o'clock, tomorrow at 5:01, this offer has expired. The seller does not have to. I might have misspoke there. This is the buyer's commitment. The seller can sign it at any time until this date and this time. Now, the seller does not have to necessarily respond. If that date and time comes, this offer just expires. It just goes away. It's just not valid anymore, even if they do sign it, okay? So this is how long you're giving them to respond, but it doesn't mean that they have to do it. You can also withdraw your offer. So if you write it for 3 days from now at 5 o'clock and tomorrow you find a house you like better and you want to make an offer on that house, you can provide in writing, or your agent can provide in writing to the seller's agent, and you can withdraw your offer. Okay, and then this offer is no longer valid either, even if they do sign it. Okay. Then down here, the seller's commitment. The seller should either commit to selling you the property and sign it, or they have two other options. They can reject it. They can flat reject it here on 576, which they say is nope, no counteroffer is being made, or they can say, hey, we're going to modify this per the attached counteroffer. Something that throws people off is that if you're going to modify it per the attached counteroffer, the seller should still be initialing every single page. So you can see all the way across here. There's an initial on every single page for the buyer and the seller. So you as the buyer are going to initial every single page and sign at the end. The seller should initial every single page and either sign at the end or mark initial every page and modify it per the attached counteroffer. Why is that important? Is because the counteroffer is probably only going to suggest a few things in here, and the rest of this agreement is still completely valid. So we want initials on every page because we need the entirety of the agreement for it to be valid. So we need an initial on every single page, an initial that they modified it per the attached counteroffer, and then signatures on the counteroffer. If they reject it, I've seen it both ways. Some agents have the sellers initial every single page and then initial as rejected. Some people just come down to the bottom, hit rejected, and send it all back to you. Anyways, is what it is. So that is the buy-sell. So I want to make sure you understand the buy-sell. The big takeaways from the buy-sell. Make sure you're buying the right property. Make sure the purchase price is correct and that you've communicated with your lender. Make sure you know all your contingencies and do your due diligence. Do not get pressured into not doing due diligence. Do your due diligence so that you are comfortable with the property, because you are going to own the property and be responsible for anything that you didn't do in due diligence after the closing. So, all right, that's a fair amount of information for you guys. That is going over the buy-sell. I want to make sure you understand the buy-sell. If you have any questions on the buy-sell, talk to your agent, talk to an attorney. Make sure you are fully comfortable with everything on that buy-sell, because it is a legal document. All right, that wraps up our class on buy-sells. As always, if there's everything I can do for you, reach out to me. I love to empower people, educate people, and make sure you are comfortable in the real estate transaction, and the buy-sell is certainly one of those spots that I think people sometimes feel like it just gets sent over to them to sign, and they rush and they initial it and they sign it online and they don't understand it, and then they don't even know when their closing date is or when their contingency dates are. Don't let that happen to you. Alrighty, folks, let's move on.